Hello and welcome to another episode of the Microbially Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Stinson. If this is your first time joining us, then welcome to the podcast. Hope you enjoy it. If you're a returning listener, then welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again. Now, I know I said I was not originally going to be doing an episode this week, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to just do a very short video updating us on what we're seeing right now with our hantavirus outbreak linked to the MV Hondius cruise ship down or originating, I guess, in Central South America, and our Ebola virus outbreak linked to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, and Uganda. So we're going to do a little bit of let's call it a bonus episode for today, Wednesday, June 3rd. And let's take some time to dissect what's really going on right now with these two big global infectious disease stories and what updates we have to share as of late. But first, I would also be remiss if I didn't call out the absolute buzz we're still hearing from our 2026 National IPAC Canada conference that just happened last week. What an amazing time. It was certainly fantastic to see so many old friends at the conference, meet so many new people. And of course, a lot of you came up and made comments on how much you'd been enjoying the podcast, gave me some great feedback, some great ideas. So, you know what? Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts and share your feedback. Truly appreciated. Love you all. Thank you for all of the work you do every day to keep our healthcare system safe. And of course, a huge shout out to our outgoing executive director, Jerry Hansen, who has really been such a foundation and a rock in establishing infection prevention and control in Canada over the past decades. Jerry, I hope you listen to this. You know, you are an absolute inspiration. Thank you for everything you've done for the profession and everything you continue to do for the profession, and you will absolutely be sorely missed. Now, I also had a really fun time collaborating with the great Wayne Tucker on his podcast, Infection Control Exchange. I'm going to link to his work below in the description of this video below. Be sure to check that out. Wayne's another great leader in infection control, doing some fantastic work spreading IPAC knowledge, and it was an absolute privilege to join him to chat a little bit about what we're seeing with hantavirus, what we're seeing with Ebola virus, and these big outbreaks, these big emerging pathogens, and talking a little bit about kind of things we've covered here already, but going into some additional detail. So once it's released, I'll certainly link to that in a future episode. But Wayne, thank you so much for having me on the show. Love to collaborate again in the future. All right, so where do we sit now with these two big outbreaks that seemed to have dominated the media over the past few weeks? Well, we'll start off with the older one. We'll start off with an update on hantavirus, or rather, as we talked about, the more formal naming convention, the Andes virus. Now, this, as you may recall, is the outbreak of a relatively rare virus that's linked to the cruise ship, the MV Hondius. Now, if you haven't had a chance to check out that episode, I will link to that in the description below. Be sure to check that one out. Now, this was a relatively innocuous outbreak at the time, which received far more media hype than was probably necessary. But just to recap, Andes virus, it's a virus under the family, the hantaviruses. It lives and usually infects asymptomatically the long-tailed pygmy rice rat in South America, and it can cause diseases of humans, and as can a number of other hantaviruses. Where the Andes virus is unique is that, unlike the other hantaviruses, it has the ability to subsequently transmit from person to person. It doesn't really like to, but it can. So it's not really efficient. It's not really an efficient process of transmission, and it relies on close, prolonged exposure to generate secondary cases. So where do we typically then see transmission? Well, we see it in household contacts, we see it in unprotected healthcare workers, or we see it with people sitting with the same people on a cruise ship in close quarters for 3 meals a day over and over and over. In other words, you get it with those close, prolonged, persistent contacts. You don't get it because someone coughed in the grocery store line behind you. So that's our Andes virus, capable of human-to-human spread, but not very efficient at it. So where are we today with this outbreak? Well, last we spoke, hantavirus 3 weeks ago, we were at 9 total cases linked to the outbreak. Today, our case count sits at 13 positive cases, including 2 deaths. The most recent case was on the 25th of May, but that was actually an asymptomatic case, so it's hard to say were they infected around then, were they infected far earlier. It's kind of hard to pin down the true point of transmission with asymptomatic cases. But clearly, cases have not taken off dramatically and spread spread disease all over the world. The outbreak will formally continue until 42 days from the most recent positive case. That's the incubation window. And so we're currently projecting somewhere around early July. Now, what's crazy here is Canada actually had a case. And I did not realize this until I started doing some background for this episode. We had someone test positive from the cruise ship who was in quarantine in British Columbia around the 17th of May. But it wasn't front page news. So like what happened with this outbreak where it went from dominating everything to, this is going to be the next COVID, this is going to be the next big pandemic, to us having a case in Canada, in North America, and it really didn't dominate any of the news circuits. And well, you see, while this was all unfolding, we had another bug that kind of just went, shh, I got a better outbreak than that. So now we've got Ebola, or rather, again, just like with hantavirus, there's a bit of a naming convention mix here. So this is an outbreak of the Bundibugyo virus, one of the 3 Ebola viruses capable of causing disease in humans. Again, check out our episode last week. We go over that naming convention. We go over these different viruses. We go over some of those idiosyncrasies around viral phylogeny. Now, when we talked last week, we were looking at an outbreak that had quickly surged from the first few cases identified in early May to over 1,000 confirmed or suspected cases by late May. Now what we're seeing as figures as somewhere around 321 confirmed cases with 48 confirmed deaths, and an additional 116 suspect cases still being adjudicated. Uganda reports an additional 11 cases with 1 death. Now, obviously, huge reduction in case count. And it's really not surprising. What we were looking at was a very large number of people with very generic early phase symptoms, which the challenge with early phase Ebola is it does have very generalized symptoms. So you had a large number of people with generalized symptoms with a rough epidemiological link that needed to be worked up. And that's especially true with a milder version of the Ebola virus, like the Bundibugyo virus. Many patients have generalized symptoms and an epidemiological link are just considered a suspect case until testing is eventually ruled out. And we've had suspect cases or rather persons under investigation in Canada that have subsequently tested negative. Now, this is still an important, obviously a really important finding. First, it suggests that the scope of the outbreak was likely not nearly as bad as initially feared. Still the largest outbreak of Bundibugyo virus that we've ever seen, so not undermining the scale or severity of the outbreak in any way there. But it's certainly not the 1,000 cases that we were talking about as much as a week ago. Second, the outbreak curve still has a really significant left shift. And what I mean by that is when we plot out how many cases per day, instead of this nice kind of trend where you see a tail in, it increases and it decreases over time, the outbreak curve still has everything kind of shifted off to the start. And this really supports a hypothesis, like we previously discussed last week, that this outbreak had likely been ongoing for weeks or months prior to detection, fueled by a combination of two things. Fueled by the fact that this particular virus, the Bundibugyo virus, is a milder version of Ebola virus disease, still has a 10 to 30% case mortality rate, so still a very severe disease, but milder than, let's say, the Zaire virus, which has upwards of a 70 to 80% case mortality rate. So that's one thing that has likely suppressed the detection and suppressed the early identification of the outbreak. But we combine that with what we talked about around the instability in the region, the humanitarian crisis of the region, the difficulty to get accurate public health measures in place, and how that would impair early outbreak detection. So taking these two things together, it still supports this notion that we're looking with a virus that had been circulating for a few weeks to even a few months. We started to find it when it started spilling over into healthcare workers. But that now we're really seeing, okay, we understand where we're going, we understand where the outbreak is, we're starting to get outbreak measures into place. So let's ask the all-important question then, what can we expect with these two outbreaks in the coming weeks? And it's probably easiest to answer that with the Andes virus outbreak. We've already seen activity of ongoing cases drop off dramatically from that initial cluster. And given what we know about how Andes virus transmits, it likes that close contact, it likes that prolonged exposure, it likes environments like households and like cruise ships. So given all those things and that we have quarantine measures in place, that we shouldn't really see that much more transmission. Now, it will still be a while before the outbreak's declared over. Like we said, it has that long incubation period of 42 days. Still certainly possible that people are going to convert over the next 42 days. But the majority of the risk is likely already been isolated, identified, quarantined. Now, for Ebola, or rather Bundibugyo, this is still a little bit more of a tenuous situation. Certainly, we are seeing what looks like a slight slowing of cases, although that might just be slowing in that we were so left shifted in terms of finding pre-existing cases that it's hard to say really where we are on an epidemiological curve. But we know with Ebola viruses that good public health measures does take effect relatively well and should halt transmission. But they are notorious to take advantage of small mistakes. Ebola viruses are, that is. And so given all of these factors we previously talked about, instability in the region, challenges with maintaining rigid public health measure, it's certainly still a possibility that we could continue to see this virus simmering over the coming weeks, flaring up from time to time, ongoing low-level transmission, and seeing this as a little bit more of an ongoing, persistent outbreak. I do hope that isn't the case. I really hope that we're able to get some good quality public health measures in place to halt this transmission, but this is a situation where ongoing vigilance is crucial. And of course, incubation period for Ebola virus, 21 days. It's a little bit better than the Andes virus, but still takes quite a bit of time to effectively control anyone who's been exposed to make sure they don't convert and expose others. Now, with that said, the risk outside of the region remains very low. Certainly the risk of a global pandemic with Bundibugyo virus is extremely low. It instead will persist as a reminder that we are a globalized populace and that what happens in one portion of the world does impact others, because we still have a risk in Canada and North America of importing cases as travelers to the region. But that's where we sit with these two big outbreaks thus far, and it brings us to a close on today's kind of special bonus episode of Microbially Speaking. Thanks so much for listening. Next week we are still planning a more fulsome episode where we will talk about the period or the time where Ebola made an appearance in North America. So be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that episode. As always, if you have any thoughts or ideas on this week's episode, things you want to see in a future episode of the podcast, please put those in the comments below. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Microbially Speaking. Bye now.